So this lecture is going to cover chapter 21, which is the reproductive systems. So this is the one system where we will see a little bit of variance between the male and the female organs found in the system. Function is going to be essentially the same between the two, but we will see different organs that we'll talk about. The main function of the reproductive system is going to be producing offspring. In humans, this occurs through sexual reproduction, which requires two parent organisms, specifically a male and a female. So each of the parents will contribute half of the chromosomes needed to form the first cell of an offspring organism. So one advantage of this is that we get a new mixture of genes in each offspring, which is going to increase the variety of genetic characteristics. The reproductive system of each of these parents is going to produce their own reproductive cells called gametes. So in males, that's the sperm, and then in females, it's the egg or the ovum. So sexual reproduction is going to require two parents. Asexual only requires one parent. So that is going to result in an offspring that's genetically identical to itself. So this occurs in cells. You'll see asexual reproduction. Typically, sexual maturity and the ability to reproduce will occur at puberty. So with the male and the female systems, again, we'll have the common general structure and function, but the systems are going to be adapted to either the sperm or the ova. And if we're talking about the female, then we also look at development and birth of the offspring. And then each system will have sex hormones associated with it that play a role in the development of secondary sexual characteristics and normal reproductive system activity. So we'll start with the male reproductive system. So the essential organs of reproduction are going to be the gonads, or the testes, which actually produce the sex cells. And then the accessory organs are going to be ducts. And there's multiple passageways that we'll talk about that will carry the sperm from the testes to the exterior of the body. Sex glands, which produce protective and nutrient solution for the sperm, and then the external genitalia. So this is kind of an overview of the organization of the male reproductive. So you can see the testes here located inside the scrotum. And then we start with the epididymis, and then we'll move our way through this passageway until we get through the urethra and outside of the body. So the testes are located in the scrotum. The reason for this is that they need a slightly lower temperature for that sperm production to take place. So that's why they're located outside of the body. If it's really cold outside, the scrotum will actually kind of shrink in towards the body to help elevate the temperature of the testes. The testes are going to be covered by tunica albuginea, which is going to divide the testes into lobules. And then inside of those lobules, we'll find the seminiferous tubules, which is where the actual sperm development takes place. And then the interstitial cells, so the cells kind of between the tissues are going to produce testosterone, which is a hormone that we'll talk about in a little bit. So here is the testes as a whole. Then you can see the tunica albuginea, so this kind of white area, which is going to divide the testes into lobules. And then we see the seminiferous tubules inside of those lobules. And they will all kind of meet up, and the sperm will go to the epididymis on top. So as we talked about, the main function of the testes is going to be the production of sperm or spermatogenesis. So the cells that are going to turn into the sperm are called spermatogonia. Meiosis is going to produce a primary spermatocyte, which forms 4 spermatids with 23 hormones. So those are then going to turn into the spermatozoa, or the sperm cells. And these are going to be what's going to work its way through those tubules to the exterior of the body. So the spermatozoa, they have a head that's going to contain genetic material. An ecrosome is going to contain the enzymes that assist the sperm in penetration of the ovum, so that kind of sits on top. And then mitochondria in the mid piece provide the energy for movement. And then we have the flagella, or that little tail, that's going to actually result in movement. So we start with the spermatogonia, and then meiosis takes place. We end up with a primary spermatocyte, which is going to divide into 4 spermatids, which then mature into the sperm cells. So most men will continue to produce significant numbers of sperm throughout their life, but that number will slowly diminish as age increases. So the last kind of function of the testes that we'll talk about is that production of testosterone. So this is the masculinization hormone. It's going to promote development of male accessory glands and organs, and then it stimulates protein anabolus and the development of muscle strength. So this is what gives men kind of that overall stronger masculine appearance. So here is the process of spermatogenesis. So here's your spermatogonia, those original cells, and then we will have division into the primary spermatocyte. Meiosis will take place, and then we'll end up with 4 spermatids here. Those spermatids will form into sperm cells, and then will result. So the one spermatogonia will result in 4 sperm cells. Those cells will then start to move through the reproductive ducts. So these are where that passageway for sperm after they exit the testes, and then until we get the urethra. So the first is the epididymis. So this is a single coiled tube, lies on top and just behind the testes in the scrotum. So as the sperm are passing through the epididymis, they're going to mature and develop the capacity for motility. Then they will move on to the vas deferens, or the ductus deferens. So this basically just acts as a passageway between the epididymis. Then it's going to meet up with the seminal vesicle to form the ejaculatory duct. So the vas deferens is where a vasectomy takes place. So this is the portion that they will cut if a vasectomy is being performed. So once that vas deferens joins with the seminal vesicle, they will form the ejaculatory duct, which then moves into the urethra. So we start at the testes, go through the epididymis to the vas deferens, seminal vesicle, and then the ejaculatory duct, and ending at the urethra. Some accessory glands of the male reproductive system. The first is semen. So this is a mixture of sperm and the secretions of the accessory sex glands. About 3 to 5 milliliters per ejaculation, with each milliliter containing 100 million sperm. So you're averaging 3 to 500 million sperm with each ejaculation. The semen is also going to protect the sperm from the acidic environment of the female reproductive tract. Seminal vesicles are going to be pouch-like glands that produce the seminal fluid or the semen. So this secretion is kind of yellowish and thick, and it's going to be rich in fructose, which provides energy to the sperm for that motility. Then we have the prostate gland located below the bladder. So the urethra is actually going to pass through this gland. The secretion from the prostate will make up about 30% of semen, and it's thin and kind of a milky color. And this is going to activate the sperm and again provide that motility that it needs to work through the female reproductive tract. So then the bulbourethral or the Cowper gland is going to provide a mucus-like fluid, makes up about 5% or a little less of the seminal fluid volume. This one's pretty important though, so it's going to neutralize the acidity of the urethra. So when that urine passes through the urethra, it can kind of leave an acidic layer behind, and then if the sperm passes through that, it will damage it. So the secretion from the bulbourethral gland is going to neutralize that. It's going to go first before the semen and then neutralize any of the acid found in the urethra. It also lubricates the urethra to protect the sperm from damage, and it adds an external lubrication to the penis that's needed for intercourse. So this is what is considered pre-ejaculation. And then the last components of the male reproductive system are going to be the external genitalia. So the penis and the scrotum make up the external genitals of male. The penis is going to be composed of 3 columns of erectile tissue. So 2 dorsal are the corpora cavernosa, and then the 1 ventral, which surrounds the urethra, is the corpus spongiosum. The glans penis is also going to be covered by foreskin, and this is the portion that's removed during a circumcision. So then we have the female reproductive system. The essential organs are going to be the ovaries as opposed to the testes in the male. And then the sex cell is the ova as opposed to the sperm in the male. And then the accessory organs are going to be composed of the ducts or modified ducts, and then sex glands and the external genitals. So this kind of shows an overview of the female reproductive system. So we have the ovary located here, fallopian tube then leads to the uterus and the cervix, and then we have the vagina leading to the exterior portion of the body. So we'll talk about the ovaries first. So they're paired glands, so we have 2, one on each side, weighing in at about 3 grams each. And they do resemble a large almond in shape and size. They're attached to ligaments in the pelvic cavity on each side of the uterus. So this is what keeps the ovaries in place so that they stay close to the tubes where they're supposed to. So then inside the ovary, we will find an oocyte, which is an immature sex cell. So females start with about 1 million at birth. By the time they reach puberty, those oocytes have developed into primary follicles, and we have about 400,000 of those. And then once a woman is kind of in the reproductive lifetime or reproductive age. They're looking at about 350 to 500 mature follicles. So only 350 to 500 eggs that a woman will ovulate during their reproductive lifetime. So as opposed to men who continue to make sperm throughout their lifetime, women have a relatively short reproductive life. After that egg has been released from the ovary or ovulated, we have the corpus luteum left, which is a ruptured follicle, egg follicle, that is going to secrete hormones. So here's kind of the process. So this is within the ovary. The cells are going to mature until they become a mature follicle here. And then the ovary essentially ruptures and pushes that oocyte out, pushes that egg out. And then what's left of that follicle turns into the corpus luteum here. That will eventually degenerate and be reabsorbed into the body. So main function of the ovary is going to be oogenesis. So this is the meiotic cell division that is going to produce a daughter cell. So going to end up with 23 chromosomes, which is the same amount that the sperm have. So once they meet up, we'll have a full 46 chromosomes. It's also going to play a role in the production of estrogen and progesterone. So that granulosa cell, which surrounds the oocyte in the mature follicle, produces estrogen. The corpus luteum, so that follicle after the oocyte has been released, is going to produce progesterone, which is going to stimulate the secretory activity of the uterine epithelium and assist the estrogen in initiating menses. Estrogen itself is going to be responsible for the development and maintenance of secondary sex characteristics. So once that egg has been released from the ovary, it's going to start working its way through the female reproductive system, through those reproductive ducts. So the first one is going to be the uterine tubes, also known as the fallopian tubes or the oviducts. So these are about 10 centimeters in length. It's kind of a weird process to me, but the distal end of the fallopian tube have what's called fimbriae, and I think of them like little fingers. So the egg essentially releases into the abdominal cavity, and then the fimbriae from the fallopian tubes have to kind of grab that egg and bring it into the tube. Once it goes through the tube, it's going to end up in the uterus. So the uterus is made up of 3 different parts: the body, the fundus, and the cervix. So the fundus is kind of the top part between the 2 fallopian tubes. The body is the main portion of the uterus, and then the cervix is leading into the vagina. Lies in the pelvic cavity just behind the urinary bladder. So this explains why during pregnancy women have to go to the bathroom a lot. And then the uterus itself is going to have a couple of different layers. So myometrium is the muscle layer, and the endometrium is the internal lining of the uterus, and this is that lining, that membrane that is lost during menstruation. So typically about every 28 to 30 days, women will experience their menstrual cycle. So that occurs up until about 45 to 50 years of age, and then menopause will take place, and that is the end of the menstrual cycles. So then after the uterus, the next phase of the reproductive ducts is the vagina. So this is a distensible tube, which means that it's capable of expanding, located between the urinary bladder and the rectum. Is going to receive the penis during sexual intercourse, and then it also serves as the birthing canal during a vaginal delivery of a baby. The vagina is considered an accessory or supportive sex gland. So here we can kind of get a visual for all of these structures. So here's the ovary here, and you can see the egg going through its cycle. So it gets released from the ovary, and then the fimbriae of the fallopian tube have to kind of grab onto it and pull it in, and then it'll work its way through the fallopian tube into the uterus. So fundus is this portion up here. Body is going to be down here, and then the cervix is this area. So endometrium is that internal lining, the myometrium is that muscle layer, and then perimetrium is going to be the external portion of the uterus. After the uterus, it leads down into the vagina. Some accessory glands of the female reproductive system are going to be the vestibular glands, which secrete mucus. This is going to kind of act as that lubricating fluid during intercourse, and the ducts are going to open between the labia minora, which we'll look at in just a couple of slides. The next accessory gland is the breasts. So these sit over the pectoral muscles on the chest. Size is going to be determined more so by fat quantity than the amount of glandular or that milk secreting tissue. And then we'll have lactoriferous ducts, which are going to drain from the glandular tissue to the nipple. So that allows for breastfeeding of a child. This kind of gives you a side view. So size of breast is more determined by this fatty breast tissue here, as opposed to the amount of glandular tissues or milk-producing tissues. Then we have the external genitals of the female. So the vulva is kind of the overall term for the external genitals, but it is composed of several structures. So we have the mons pubis, the clitoris, external urinary meatus, the labia minora, labia majora, the hymen, and then the openings of the vestibular ducts and the vagina. So we'll look at these real quick. So here's the mons pubis up top, labia majora, it's going to run on the side, and then labia minora is here. This would be the external urinary meatus, and then right below it there's an opening of a vestibular gland. Clitoris is on top, and then this is kind of an internal view of the vestibular glands here. And the other area that we have is the perineum, which is the area between the vaginal opening and the anus. This area can have some damage during vaginal delivery, so sometimes it is cut surgically in a procedure called an episiotomy. And the perineum is this section right here. So the menstrual cycle is going to occur when the uterus has prepared for the implantation of a fertilized egg, but then that doesn't take place. So it's a shedding of the lining of that endometrium. Lasts about 5 to 7 days every 28 days, but it will vary from month to month and among individuals. So there's different phases of the menstrual cycle. The first is menses, which is the first 4 to 5 days of the cycle. It does vary a little bit, but this is when that endometrium or the uterine lining is going to kind of slough off, resulting in discharge and bleeding. Then we have the proliferative phase, which is between the menses and the secretory phase. This is going to vary a little bit, but this is essentially the body getting ready for ovulation. Once ovulation takes place, we enter into the secretory phase. So this is when the uterus really starts to prepare for the implantation of that fertilized egg. So the endometrium is going to thicken. We're going to have follicle stimulating or FSH, and then the luteinizing hormone LH. That's going to kind of give us that initial ovulation that's going to take place. And then if we have a decrease in estrogen and progesterone from that corpus luteum, then menstruation is going to take place because pregnancy is not going to occur. So this cycle just repeats itself, starting with menses and then the proliferative, ovulation, and finally secretory. This shows a couple of different things. So it's actually kind of a nice slide. It shows the function of the pituitary gland and the luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, then the ovary, the estrogen and progesterone, and then also what's happening to those follicles in the cycle. And then down here, it shows kind of the lining of the uterus, that endometrium, how it thickens, and then once that corpus luteum deteriorates, it's going to begin that sloughing process or menses. Ovulation is probably considered the most important portion of the menstrual cycle, particularly if a woman is trying to get pregnant. This is when it is possible for fertilization of the egg to take place. So if we're looking at a 28-day cycle, ovulation is going to occur around day 14. If you have a 30-day cycle, it'd be around day 16. So a woman is considered to be in a fertile period 3 to 5 days before ovulation, and then 24 hours after. So the sperm are going to retain their fertilizing power for only 24 to 72 hours after it enters into the female reproductive tract. So it's not a very large window for either the egg or the sperm to meet up and for that penetration of the sperm into the egg to take place and then implantation. The menstrual cycle is going to be controlled by a couple of different hormones. So gonadotropin releasing hormone is going to stimulate the secretion of FSH and LH from the anterior pituitary gland. Those two hormones are then going to result in ovulation. Birth control pills are going to play a role in suppressing that follicle stimulating hormone secretion. If there's a low level of FSH, no follicles are going to start to grow in the ovaries. So none of them are going to become mature enough to actually ovulate. So if that happens, that oocyte will essentially just be reabsorbed back into the body. So kind of a summary of the reproductive system. So they're both going to revolve around the production of those reproductive cells. Both are going to play a role in the production of sex hormones required for secondary sex characteristics and normal reproductive function. And then both men and women are going to have similar structures to accomplish those complementary functions. So even though the organs themselves are different, the structures are similar as far as, gonads, accessory ducts, all of that. And then this kind of gives a overview of the female and male reproductive systems. There's essential organs, sex cells, hormones, all that stuff. That is chapter 21. If you have any questions, please let me know.